The most important part to any zoo is the animals in the enclosures they call home. Throughout the series, I'll be designing different enclosures for an array of animals, whilst also keeping guest interaction at the forefront of every build. Join me each week as I tackle a new enclosure and idea and try and bring it to life within Planet Zoo. Today I wanted to tackle my first big cat enclosure. Big cats are a big draw to any zoo, and I wanted to start off strong with lions. My idea isn't really based on a particular enclosure I have seen in person, because I wanted more of a theme which you'll see throughout the build. The style I was going for was a Pride Rock-esque A Lion King inspired look. I wanted the enclosure to be fairly large so it'll feature a lot of sporadic detail, because I don't want to overfill the enclosure with too much detail. Here are the requirements for the enclosure. As you can see, we've got a large land requirement at 705 square meters. Temperature is also another thing to consider, which you will see I place heaters later on in the build, especially within the lion house itself. Water isn't a necessary feature within the build itself, but I have added water around the edge of the enclosure just to add it as a little feature and also keep guests a little bit further away from the lions themselves. At the top of the screen we have the social structure for the lions, as well as group sizes and the size of a male and female lion, plus the weight and life expectancy, and at the bottom there we have the life cycle as well. To start with, I wanted to lay out the enclosure itself and sort of get a feel for how big I wanted it to be. As you can see here, I'm toying with the idea of making it a bit smaller and then make it a bit bigger, and I wanted to add some unique shapes to it. At the same time, I wanted guests to have access all the way around the enclosure, as you can see, which they will here. And now I'm just deciding on a sort of rock type and features to start with to get the outer layer of the enclosure put together. And as you can see here, I decided with these rocks and I started placing them around the edge of the enclosure. Once I had finished placing all the rocks, I decided to add a dip around the edge of the island, just to sort of have a bit of space between the guests and the lions themselves, which this I later fill in with water. I'm just making my way around the edge of the enclosure now. So I've left a decent sized gap to start building the lion house here, which you can see now coming together. I later changed those windows so they're not as wide. Here I am just sort of fiddling and then moving it into place so that I'm really making use of all that space. Here I am just adding some decorative features to the edge of the enclosure and just making the house itself look a bit more flush with the enclosure itself. Now I'm moving on to the inside of the enclosure, and because I wanted a Pride Rock sort of theme, I thought rocks would be the best thing for this. So here I'm sort of working on a rock feature using different types of rocks and layers to sort of build up some depth. This isn't the only rock feature I have in the enclosure, as I later place a pre-built model down the other end of the enclosure itself. With the rock work in place, I thought it was time to add some trees. I decided on palm trees because I wanted to go for an island look, which probably isn't very African lion-esque, but it was sort of the feel I was going for, which you can see here, where I'm adding the very fine sand texture to the enclosure itself. And I later then add some different levels with the rock texture as well as the longer grass to get the balance right for the lions. I'm now adding an electric fence around the edge. This is so that the lions can't access the water. As you can see, it's very low to the ground, and I later changed this in the build so that it's higher up, just for extra safety. Here I am working on the keeper access to the enclosure and also making some additional changes to the lion house. Like I mentioned earlier, I here add a wall just to sort of enclose those windows a little bit more, and this is where I start toying with different glass panes just to see what works, and I eventually find something that works and start placing that along the windows there. So it's not just inside the enclosure I wanted the theming to carry on, I wanted it to appear as you're walking around the enclosure itself. So here I am just adding a little feature to the side of the build, and just to sort of build up the theme and the immersion for when guests are walking around. You'll see here that I'm toying around with different lion sculptures, seeing what works best, and I decided with the white lines because they popped against the rock. Here I am just adding some more sand around the edge to really add to that immersion. Now I have the line in the enclosure, I'm just adding some really finishing touches like long grass, just to sort of really fill the space and also give the lions somewhere, mainly shade and cover from guest view. Here I am adding some more greenery just to add that pop of colour to the island itself. Here I'm about to add some feeding stations and enrichment for the lions, and also give them some bedding so they have somewhere to rest their head within the lion house. I also wanted the lions to have some height within the enclosure, so here I've added some apparatus, and a little while later on I add another rock feature for them to climb above. Here's that rock feature going in now, and like I mentioned, here I am raising the fence so that it's safer for guests to view. So the final part of this build is to just add some additional theming and really carry on that theme around the edge of the enclosure, and here I'm sort of toying with different statues and things just to sort of really pop and hit home that this is a lion enclosure. Overall, I'm happy with the build. I think there's a few things I could tweak if I could go back and do that, which I might do at a later date. But here's all the additional theming being added, and here's the final result.